After this test match is over, 4 test matches in 5 weeks have crammed a lot of red ball cricket into the start of the summer. We then go into full-on white ball mode for the next month, really. It's all about July. Stefan, talk us through the scheduling and who England are up against.
It's rather difficult, isn't it, for England in this catching up period. In fact, this test match in particular has made it hard to fit all the games in, because India should have only been here for some white ball matches. And so the T20 series against India starts pretty much as soon as this test finishes, which means that no players that have been involved in the test side or are playing in the test side can therefore go on and play for England in those T20 matches. Then there's some one-day matches against India that follow after that. So the T20 starts on the 7th of July. That's Thursday. So only 2 days after this test match finishes. And then the 3 one-dayers from the 12th of July. And then South Africa arrive for their own white ball series before those test matches in August. But this is all obviously leading up towards the T20 World Cup, which is in the autumn in Australia in October and November. Not a lot of time for England to get ready for that. Only 6 more matches, I think, for England to nail those 11 before they go off to Pakistan and play 7 T20s in Pakistan, and what will be a pretty historic tour, of course. It's
a second World T20 within a year, isn't it? In very, very different circumstances. The one last year being in the UAE, and the pitches in Australia are going to be very, very different. So we've had the squads. They've been announced in the last few minutes. What has caught your eye, Stefan?
Well, obviously, it's how England go about replacing Owen Morgan, which is different. A different problem in the T20 squad as it is in the one-day squad. So to go through the list of names for the international T20s against India: Josh Buttler captains. Then we've got the regular of Moeen Ali, Harry Brooke, who's only ever played one T20 before, back in the West Indies, Sam Curran, Richard Gleason, uncapped Lancashire fast bowler, Chris Jordan, Liam Livingston, Dawid Malan, once the best T20 batter in the world, our very own Tymal Mills, Matthew Parkinson, the leg spinner, Jason Roy, Phil Salt, Reece Topley, David Willey. No Adil Rashid in that squad. He's been released by the ECB to go on the Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca. And then for the one-dayers, Buttler, the new captain, Moeen, Johnny Bairstow, Harry Brooke, Bryden Carr, Sam Curran, Liam Livingston, Craig Overton, Matthew Parkinson, Joe Root, one of those test players back in the one-day squad, Jason Roy, Phil Salt, Ben Stokes back in the one-day squad as well, Reece Topley and David Willey. When you look at the T20 side, England have rather skillfully managed to avoid a big decision over the past couple of years, because they've always not been able to pick a full-strength team because of the schedule, and that was how to fit about 13 batters into the top 6 or 7. Now Owen Morgan has retired, that's clearly freeing up one space, and you'd feel that someone like possibly Ben Stokes comes back into the best T20 side. Someone like Liam Livingston, who wasn't always in England's best T20 side, now becomes an automatic pick. And then for the one-day team with no Morgan in it, does Liam Livingston again slot into that middle order? Interestingly, in the one-day party, no Dawid Malan, having not made 100 in the Netherlands, an innings which Henry saw.
Yes, Henry, I was going to say, so the side that you saw in the Netherlands, fair few of them are in this one. But the most notable omission is Dawid Malan. He got 100 out there.
He did it quicker than a run of ball as well. But it was 100 that, in the relative scheme of that game, England scoring 498 for 4, it felt quite pedestrian. And at the end of the game, I sort of jovially said, "Oh, David, you must be devastated to finish on 498 and miss out on those 2 runs." He said, "Yeah, I feel like I batted a bit slowly, actually." And maybe this is an indication, maybe this is a little bit of a sign that actually the role that he's played for a number of years for England's white ball team, of being that anchor around which other players can play, isn't quite what they're looking for. And when you look at that squad, well, you return Joe Root to perhaps the Dawid Malan position. It's hard to argue, even if you're Dawid Malan's mum, it should be Joe. It shouldn't be Joe Root in that side. You know, it's quite clearly a significant upgrade. But you'd feel disappointed if you're Milan. But maybe that reflects a little bit more about the opponents in the Netherlands as anything else. I mean, the other really striking thing about the England white ball setup is most teams strive for a left-arm bowler. England have just got an absolute ton of them. There's everywhere you look, you've got left-arm bowlers, David Willey, Reece Topley, you've got Sam Curran in there. So there's so many options as left-arm bowlers. And the challenge in some ways is where's the variation in that?
Who do you think, other than Malan, is a surprise omission, because obviously they're trying to keep as many Test players out of white ball at the moment, but longer term that's not going to be realistic. Once they get into the nitty-gritty of the T20 World Cup and then the 50 over World Cup, which is next year, they're going to need to have their very best players out there. So, I mean, Stokes is an obvious one who's been left out of the T20 side, but he's been brought into the ODI side, so they're not giving him that rest. And another thing I want us to think about is the dynamic, how that will change with Jos Buttler as captain.
I don't think it will change a great deal, because as you've seen for the past number of years, that Owen Morgan and Joe Root, and even before that Owen Morgan and Alistair Cook have rubbed along quite nicely. The interesting, or the good thing about that from an England point of view, is that when they've split the captaincy, neither of those captains have had designs on doing the other man's job. And that is what's really helped England, actually, to keep those formats separate, to know that, for example, when it has been Joe Root over the past number of years, he was really happy just to return to the ranks under Owen Morgan, because everyone knew that Owen Morgan was at the top of that team and that Joe Root didn't want to be the white ball captain. And that will be exactly the same with Buttler and Stokes. When Stokes first got the Test job, one of the big things was, how are England going to manage him? Because he's so important in the white ball formats. How are they going to take him out of those games so that they could manage him in Test cricket, so that it was always fresh for Test matches? Because even his injury record in Test cricket has been a little bit checkered. And it's going to be fascinating to see how they get him to peak, because there are 2 World Cups coming in the next 18 months, one in Australia, as we've just mentioned, in the T20 format, and then when England go to India at the end of next summer to defend that 50 over title. And my point, I was surprised, or at the time I thought I would be surprised to see England Ben Stokes play almost any white ball cricket for England outside of those tournaments. But clearly after this Test match, which finishes on Tuesday, with that first one-day international not starting until the following week, England and Ben Stokes have decided, look, he's going to have enough rest. He's probably feeling fantastic from the way that England have played over the past month under his captaincy, and he wants to keep going. Whether or not we see him playing in the matches against South Africa later on that month, as England build up towards those Test matches, and don't forget there's a little matter of the 100 starting, when some of England's Test players will want to be, or certainly the ECB will want some of England's biggest name Test players playing at the beginning of that competition before those Test matches start. We'll have to wait and see, but it's obviously fantastic that England are able to field something close, or I think that would be pretty much a first choice one-day side, notwithstanding the number of fast bowlers that are missing, which I think is something that we're going to talk about.
Exactly that.
For those one-dayers.
Because they're missing Wokes. I mean, we say they're missing Archer. It's become a sort of state, really, not having Archer. They're missing Mark Wood. So that's when you see names like Bryden Cars, for example, and Craig Overton in the one-day squad. That does... that's a problem for England, isn't it?
It is. You look at some other international sides who have got gun bowlers that, when it comes to the big moments in games, you would trust them to either bowl an over that doesn't go for more than 4 or 5, or you're going to get a wicket. Someone like Jasprit Bumrah or Pat Cummins or Rashid Khan. A bowler like that. England, without Joffrey Archer and Mark Wood, do they have that X factor, particularly when it comes to fast bowling? And you think of the bouncy pitches in Australia that will be coming up for the T20 World Cup at the back end of the year. Is that going to really suit the bowling lineup that England have if it doesn't include Wood and Archer? England might have to go into it thinking, well, go sort of Kevin Keegan, if you like. We'll score more than you will, kind of thing, rather than thinking we can back our bowlers in this. On Stokes, I think there's a couple of interesting elements to this, which are, one, as we heard from his interview with Aggers yesterday, he wants to play white ball cricket, and he is determined to play, and he is addicted to getting involved and being part of it and being a key member of the side. Also, with Owen Morgan going, while Jos Buttler is a very obvious replacement, it does leave a little bit of a vacuum in terms of leadership in the side, because suddenly you've lost one of your generals has moved to captaincy, the other one has moved on and retired, and suddenly you go down that list, and yes, Joe Root's in the squad and Jason Roy's there, players that have been around quite a long time, but you've got quite a lot of reasonably inexperienced players in that squad. So Ben Stokes comes in not just as a key player, but also acting as a little bit of an extra leader within the camp, offer a bit of experience to those younger players. So it might be his inclusion is partly because of that as well. Of course, what he offers on the pitch we know all about.
I mean, it looks to me like there is a bit of a shootout going to go on here, though, because it seems unlikely that England will get all of those fast bowlers back and consistently back for the World T20. So it'll be interesting to see which of these other guys have come through. Richard Gleason is a name that actually screams out. Sam Curran, who's had a fantastic season with the bat and is just starting to come back from his injury and bowling a little bit more. He is someone who's going to be key, you might think.
You just asked a minute ago, was there an obvious name missing from either of those squads that we thought should have been in? And I'll be honest, I fudged the answer because I couldn't think of one. And it has now come to me. When you are thinking about the extra pace that is missing from those squad of a Joffrey Archer, a Mark Wood or an Ollie Stone, and you're thinking ahead to the T20 World Cup in Australia later on in this summer, Jamie Overton, who's had a very good summer for Surrey in all formats. He has got that extra pace. That's what he was picked to do for England at Headingley last year. Gives the ball a whack, has sort of found himself playing a particular role at Surrey. I think they've called him the Kieran Pollard of their team. That's who they've likened him to. So you do wonder if, in the same way that Overton was picked to do a job for the England Test team, in the absence of some of those faster bowlers that we've spoken about, could he have been given a go, particularly in the T20 format? Because when you're looking at England's chances of winning that World Cup, that is the obvious area of weakness come October and November. They're going to have batting riches, and you would think that they would try and rely on winning a lot of tosses in order to chase down as many scores as possible. But if it comes down to a tight game, if it comes down to the death, if they need that extra pace, the wickets to be taken, those sorts of things in the real nippers at the back end of a tournament, like it was in the UAE last year, okay, in slightly different circumstances, when almost winning the toss meant that you won the game. Are England going to be okay in the fast bowling department? It's a huge question.
And you think back to 2016 and that final, really they should have won against West Indies at Calcutta. And the way that Chris Jordan bowled, not just in that game in the penultimate over, but in the semi-final against New Zealand as well, that was supreme death bowling. It was consistently that Yorker length outside off stump, very hard to get away. But what is Chris Jordan still the same bowler that was offering quite that threat? Perhaps
well, I'll tell
not.
You, at Surrey, he's not bowling those overs at the moment. He bowls, doesn't always bowl his full allocation of 4. Jamie Overton seldom bowls full allocation of 4. That Surrey side's got an awful lot of bowling options, but Topley is the one who's actually been the sort of go-to quicker bowler for Surrey, bowling both in the power play, a couple of overs, and at the back end of the innings. So he feels to me like he's a shoe-in for the squad, injuries permitting. But two other people whose names I want us to dwell on here. One is Matt Parkinson, because Adil Rashid's going on the Hajj. So he just has to play, doesn't he? I mean, we know how important unorthodox spin is in T20 tournaments around the world, whether it be left arm or right arm. They're in high demand. The only leggy in this side, this T20 squad, is Liam Livingston at the moment. And he was, you'd have to say, a part-timer. So does Parkinson actually get a go?
I was thinking back to the 2019 World Cup, and can you remember the clamour for Liam Dawson to come in as the reserve spinner when England first picked a squad and they had Joe Denley in there, and he was sort of seen as a bit of almost like what Livingston does now, as someone to bat in the middle order, bowl a bit of spin if it was needed. And at the time, we thought that spin was going to play such a big part in that tournament that eventually England ditched Denley and brought in Dawson, because we were saying, well, what happens if one of Moeen or Adil Rashid goes down? They're going to need that spin option. And in the end, Moeen wasn't even in the final 11 and England were playing Liam Plunkett. But when you're looking ahead to certainly the 50 over World Cup in 18 months' time, and you think that spin is going to play such a huge part, and that is why Liam Livingston is actually such a valuable commodity, not only to England but he's even in franchise leagues around the world, because he is gun batter. His bowling hasn't been found out yet in T20 cricket. I do wonder if that's going to happen. I'm slightly concerned that at some point someone's really going to get hold of Liam Livingston as a part-time off spinner and leg spinner. But you'd think there's got to be a role for Matt Parkinson in 18 months in that World Cup in India, and therefore he has got to be bowling, never let England down in white ball cricket, and now he's going to have his chance, you would think, in the absence of Adil Rashid.
Yeah, and England have to remember that they are looking for a side that can win that T20 World Cup, that can cope with the conditions and the bright lights and the pressure that comes with a major ICC tournament. And they need whoever is going to fulfill these roles to be used to bowling against the world's best with that pressure, with full crowds, with everything that goes with international cricket. And so Matt Parkinson has been around so many England squads, yet his opportunities have been really pretty limited. It was only happy chance, really, or unfortunate injury to Jack Leach that saw him get the opportunity in the Test side at Lord's. But he is somebody that can turn the ball sharply. He is somebody that can do something a little bit different. And England need to give the opportunity for him to find his feet and get that chance to prove it against the world's best. But that in itself is a balancing act. We remember Kuldeep Yadav the last time that India were on these shores back in 2018. And he looked absolutely unplayable. But as the series went on, England started to work it out. And by the end of it, he was getting smacked all over the place. So there's a little bit of a balancing act. You don't want to reveal your hand and what you can do too much. But they've got to ensure with somebody like Parkinson and some of these other players that they're given enough of an opportunity to find their feet against the world's best.
Another one that... Sorry.
It's also what's so fascinating about this England white ball squad now going forward, because... in the upheaval of English men's cricket in the past couple of months, Owen Morgan was the one constant. If you think of the leadership roles, that everything had changed, new Test coach, new Test captain, new white ball coach, Morgan was the only one who remained, new director of cricket as well in Rob Key. Now Owen Morgan's gone and we've got complete fresh leadership over the entire of England's senior men's cricket. That is fitting within a Test team that needs rebuilding. But in the white ball setup, this has been a team that has been together for a number of years and will soon start to break up, possibly after that one-day World Cup in India in the next few years, in 18 months' time. Morgan's already gone, and you're starting to look down some of the names, and you think they are coming towards the end of their career. Moeen Ali, Adil Rashid. How long will Joe Root be able to play two forms for? How long will Ben Stokes be able to play more than Test cricket for? What about Johnny Bairstow? I'm not saying that these guys are veterans and they're going to be over the hill, but they're certainly not going to make the World Cup after the World Cup in India, and it's how England start to move on from some of these players that made them the world's best.
Well, one of those players is a very obvious name here, is Harry Brooke, and you feel that they really want to get a look at him. They've had him in this Test squad. I will not say surprised, but I wondered if they might have found a way of getting him into this match actually by giving Johnny Bairstow the gloves. That would have opened up a slot for Harry Brooke, but they clearly really, really rate him. And his numbers in domestic T20 have been extraordinary for Yorkshire. So he's in both the T20 squad and the ODI squad, and he is exactly the kind of player you're talking about, isn't it? It's someone who could be a cover for, well, it could be cover for Root or Bairstow in a way. He's as pugnacious a player as Bairstow, but he's also got the sort of the game that resembles a bit more Root's as well. So he can be an anchor and he can tee off. We'd expect to see him fit in. Are you imagining that they're going to try and use the pool of players? Because they did in the Netherlands, didn't they? Henry, you were out there. They sort of mixed and matched.
They did, and it was a funny tour, that, because it had the fireworks at the start of it, England hitting close to 400, and you sort of knew they wouldn't bat first again because the Netherlands weren't going to put them in. Morgan always likes chasing, so you kind of knew that side of it had gone. And because of the number of players that were missing, and the fact that it was a substandard Netherlands side, because they were missing all of their best players playing county championship cricket, so it was it was a completely mismatched battle, if you like. And in that series there were opportunities given to players, and like I said, David Payne got a chance, and they were another left armer, and they were quite keen to ensure that people got an opportunity to show what they could do. But the problem is in a series like that is, what are you learning? You're learning more about them playing in in domestic T20 cricket because they're playing against better players. So you have to give them the chance against the world's best, again with that spotlight shining, to find out what they can do. And some players thrive on that sort of occasion and thrive on that sort of opportunity. I spoke to Izzy Wong, the England fast bowler in the women's Test side, and said, you've been spoken about as someone that relishes the big occasions. He says, I suppose I'm the Divock Origi of women's cricket. And in some ways England need to find the players that are the Divock Origi in the men's side, the player that will step up on the big occasion and can do something that when the crunch time comes in major ICC events, will be there to stand up and do the job. There's all sorts of talent there. They've got to get that balance right, but making sure they give them an opportunity.
We'll continue talking about this for a little while longer, but let me just update you on what's happening outside, because you may have heard Jonathan Agnew say there's going to be an umpire's inspection at 1:15. 1:15 It's 5 minutes ago, and the 3 umpires have simply wandered around and decided, looking at all the different puddles, that there's going to have to be a further inspection at 1:45. They're still out there inspecting, but what they're inspecting is quite a slow-moving scene of getting all these covers away. All the covers that were brought out initially with a very sharp shower that lasted around about 20 minutes deposited a lot of water on these covers, and then the super sopper has gone up and down and up and down, and we're left with puddles that will go pretty quickly. On a modern test ground in England these days, they'll run the super sopper over it relatively shortly. They're now folding up the cover at the bowler's ends. So, well, a 1:45 inspection might mean a 2 o'clock start. What it certainly means is that today, because they came off at around about 10 past 12, they took an early lunch, which takes them to 10 to 1, means we've lost over an hour's play. We can make up all of that hour today. So, given the over rates, you can readjust your clocks. You may have been thinking, this was very strange, a test match day could end at 5:30, but it won't today. It'll end at 7, which is slightly later than it would do on a normal day. But we will also be able to make up any remaining time left over the course of the rest of this match. So now the end time will go back out to 6:30, which is pretty much what it was normally. It'll just start half an hour earlier. You're looking sceptical.
I'll take your word for it.
Trust me. Trust me. The sun is out, by the way, which is quite a nice scene, and the super sopper is going around, but the umpires have now walked off, and they're going to come back in around about 25 minutes for an inspection. Stefan?
No, the reason I was looking quizzical was because I wasn't really listening to your explanation. I was trying to scribble down what the England 11s might be.
Okay, do you want to go for it?
From looking at those two squads, and it was more just to see how Harry Brooke would fit in, actually. And in the T20 squad, I think, looking at the players they've picked, I think he will play because there's room in the top 6 for both him and Phil Salt, regardless of where they sort of fit Phil Salt in, because presumably Joss Butler will open with Jason Roy. And then in that one-day side, it seems like there is one place for Brooke or Salt, and don't forget Salt got 100 himself in the Netherlands. So what England have actually done really well over this first month, and freed from the demands of COVID and things like that, is let players go off and play. They've been informed. One of the concerns that we had about Harry Brooke at the start of the summer was that he'd been called up to the test side, having been in fantastic form, and then he'd just find himself carrying the drinks for a couple of weeks, not playing any cricket and losing all that momentum from such a fantastic time that he's had with Yorkshire. But straight away England have been releasing players. Ollie Pope even went off to play for Surrey in between test matches. I think that is just a definite shift from the England management to get players playing as much cricket as they want to. And yeah, it does seem like Brooke, who is the coming man really in terms of England's middle order batting across all formats, really exciting player who first looked like he was going to make his name solely in the white ball formats. He's already gone off and done well all around the world, but now he's had such great form for Yorkshire in red ball cricket as well. He is the next in line in all of these things. There's a lovely story about Harry Brooke that his grandma still she lives in a house that overlooks his old cricket club, and he still takes his washing back to his grandma, and all the shirts that he has can be seen hanging on her washing line, whether they be from Yorkshire or the PSL or the Big Bash or whatever. And one day they're really hopeful that he can hang an England Test shirt there as well on his grandma's washing line.
Well, he won Cricket Writers Club Young Cricketer of the Year, and there aren't very many duffers in that illustrious group. And his mother came to collect, or was it mother? And his grandmother might have come as well, actually, to collect the award.
I think she played quite a significant role.
I think she did, didn't she? Yes.
Well, she's doing all the washing. She'll be certainly due a share of the award, isn't she?
So why don't you? Have you got a team that you think? Well, if you were selecting, Stefan, I think it's about time you were actually.
Promoted above my station once more. But I sort of just wrote down a loose top 6 for the T20 side from that squad that had been picked of Butler, Roy. And then it comes in sort of no particular order. Milan has been batting at 3. Brooke, Salt and Livingston. Moeen, probably Sam Curran then after that. Then you're looking at 2 more seamers plus Matt Parkinson. Those 2 seamers you'd think would probably be Reece Topley and David Willey.
I would think so. Looking at the
Tamal Mills.
Tamal Mills is an option, yes, as is Richard Gleason.
Well, Gleason right arm as opposed to left arm. Does that come into their thinking possibly? I mean, the other name that is not mentioned is Tom Bantam.
Tom Bantam,
which
goodness me,
because he was the coming man in a year, 18 months ago, and he had quite a lot of opportunities with England and didn't really ever find his form and his way. And you think about some of those innings he played for Somerset, and then in the Big Bash for the Brisbane Heat, he really looked the absolute real deal. And it's not, for whatever reason, things have just slipped away. He's had some decent scores, a late half century against Hampshire in the T20 last week, but somebody else done.
And as for the ODI side, can you squeeze him into that okay?
I think there's one place for Brooke or Salt. If you're thinking that, Bairstow and Royal be reunited at the top of the order, Root takes his regular place at number 3. Owen Morgan's spot was number 4, so that's the one that's up for grabs. Then you've got Stokes and Butler making the top 6 before you get into Moeen and the bowlers. So who's going to bat at number 4 for England in one-day cricket? Having said that, Butler's done a sort of floating role depending on the state of the game, but if you're going to take it as card, where would Harry Brooke, or who would be most likely to fit into that top 6 or in that number 4 role? It would be Harry Brooke. And there's one more name that I want to throw at you. Ooh. Now England have had a change of leadership in their white ball cricket. Alex Hales. Does Alex Hales come back into contention now England have a new white ball captain?
Now there is a thought.
And that is a question at some point that needs to be asked to Jos Buttler. Was Owen Morgan the driving factor behind Alex Hales not being in the England white ball setup? They now have a new director of cricket and a new coach. Alex Hales is a proven opener, a proven white ball batter around the world. Could his career be reignited now that Jos Buttler is the England captain?
Didn't Ed Smith say, not Ed Smith, Rob Key, didn't Rob Key say that he felt that he'd served his time and that, he'd done his punishment, and as far as he was concerned, he was available for selection?
The other message we've heard consistently from the England head honchos is that England will pick the strongest side available, whether that is in terms of rest of rotation around the test team or the white ball side.
Well, who do you think then comes under the spotlight? Because I suppose that brings Jason Roy's form into sharper relief, doesn't it? Because he's been the one who's been a little bit in and out.
But he scored 111.
He did. But you yourself said that Netherlands side...
There's a caveat.
What do you learn from that? And actually, watching Jason Roy for Surrey this summer, when he's come back in the T20 Blast, wasn't quite at the races to start with. Starting to find his feet now, but Alex Hales would be very much breathing down his neck.
The problem that Alex Hales has got in getting back into this England side is that, rightly or wrongly, and whatever reason it happened, he gave up a place in a team that is incredibly difficult to get into. And at no point in the time that Alex Hales has been exiled from the England team have we thought they're really missing him here, because England has gone on to get stacks and stacks of runs. And if he was a fast bowler, would he have been recalled to this England team more quickly? That I guess is the question, because that is the place where England are weakest. Unfortunately for him, he gave up a place in a batting lineup where it's really, really hard to get into.
And the top of a batting lineup as well. More good news: the covers are being rolled up. So we've had the 2 that cover the bowlers' footmarks. They've gone. And now 6 ground staff, all in shorts. One's wearing tracksuit bottoms. So that's strange. Not seen a member of the ground staff in long trousers in a long time. 5 in short trousers, 1 in long trousers, are now rolling up the covers that sit in the sort of gullies of these hover covers. There were no hover covers at Headingley, were there? There were the classic roll-on ones. But Trent Bridge and Lords and here at Birmingham, they have the proper hover cover, and so once they've rolled up those 2, one of them has now been done. The umpires ought to be able to inspect. They've said the inspection will be at 1:45. That's presumably because I can just see a little bit of puddlage. It's a very small one now. Most of the standing water has departed. The super sopper's out there, and I'm pretty confident that once they have the inspection, unless there's a patch somewhere that we don't know about, we ought to be able to get out there relatively quickly. Maybe 2 o'clock, we'll see.
On Hales, averaging 27 in this year's Blast, which is not pulling up any trees, but he has got a strike rate of close to 200, which is way ahead of anybody else. Another name who's top of the list of run scoring in this year's tournament, playing at Hampshire, James Vince. He's averaging over 60 at a strike rate of just under 150. He's a class act. He has done the job for England. He played well for that England side that was somewhat makeshift against Pakistan last year after the COVID outbreak, but he's somebody that has scored a lot of runs in domestic cricket.
But to pick Vince, you're sort of not picking Brooke, aren't you?
Well,
and the thing about Brooke is that it's not so much necessarily about whether or not he'd be better against a white ball, but isn't it, they just want to stick an England cap on him and find out what it's like.
Absolutely, but if you're looking purely at the numbers, I suppose the point is there's an awful lot of people with the bat that you could turn around and say have got a good case to be selected.
But this is what is so fantastic about the legacy of Owen Morgan, not just what he did for the England white ball team, but the time in which he did it, and I'm talking about the context of the global game, was more and more, and rightly or wrongly, depending on your point of view and what you think the priorities of individual countries and individual players should be, more and more white ball cricket, franchise leagues has taken over, more and more countries playing more white ball cricket than they are test matches, and Morgan, and with the backing of Andrew Strauss, has encouraged English players to go off and be stars in franchise leagues. James Vince himself, I think he was the leading run scorer in the Big Bash League a couple of years ago, closely followed. I think Alex Hales was in second place, actually. You had two players who weren't even in the England team dominating Australia's T20 franchise league. And what we are left with is a pool of batting talent in English cricket in the white ball game that is the absolute envy of the world. They can't pick them all, and at some time they've got to take a punt, and whatever their reasons for picking particular players are, maybe, like Hales, there was a reason for leaving him out. Like Vince, you've got to take a call between him and Brooke, and you're picking the coming man. And that is just what is so fantastic about how the English game has changed over the past 7 years, when previously 250 for 8 was seen as a good score in 50 overs, and now it's bleeding into the test side, and you're hearing someone like Ben Stokes saying, well, if you want to get into test cricket, it's not what you're doing, it's how you're doing it. He's asking county cricketers to almost play a white ball aggressive style of cricket just to get to be considered for selection for the longer form.
What's the equivalent for that for bowlers, though, Henry? Because it's very simple to describe an aggressive way of playing a game when you apply it to a batter. But what does it look like? Where's the advice to the bowler? What I see lacking in English white ball cricket, and I'm being hypercritical because they're a very good side, but when you watch the skills on show in the IPL, and we've covered a lot of that, the wide Yorkers, the slower bouncers, are there English bowlers who have quite those skills? Mark Wood's is an effective white ball bowler, but he tends not to be a bowler of variations. Chris Wokes is a bowler who's very steady and methodical and terrific with the new ball, transformed England's wicket-taking prowess in the power play. But do I see, I'm trying to think of a perfect Indian example, Prasid Krishna, somebody like that, somebody who can take pace off and who can just mix it up a bit. That doesn't seem to be there very much, and England have relied on the death bowling of Chris Jordan, which, as you have said, he's getting a little bit long in the tooth. And actually, if you look at his numbers, it hasn't always been fantastic at bowling at the death.
Timal Mills has got a good slower ball, but again, there are fitness concerns over Timal, and you perhaps put him in the same category as Mark Wood, as somebody that on their day is absolutely in your side, but can you be certain when you're planning for a major tournament 4 months down the line that they're going to be there? Joffrey Archer would be your obvious contender to be that role, because he can do everything, and he is somebody that can bowl incredibly quick, he can adapt to the conditions, he has got a few variations and can do a few different things. It is part of perhaps the England's side that is lacking a little bit, and for all these batting riches, the bowling is where England perhaps will fall down, and it's all well and good having the Formula One car, if you like, and the Formula One engine in the batting department, but if you stick it in a car that doesn't suit it, you're not going to, do you know what I mean? You haven't got that full package that's going to get you down the road towards,
well, a few years
ago, a very confused analogy.
Yeah, correct.
It's interesting though, isn't it? Because batting power should be almost like the birth of bowling innovation, isn't it?
Yes.
The bowlers have to adapt or die, basically.
Yes.
You've got to come up with a new plan to stop Joss Butler reverse scooping you over third man for six.
It's an arms race, basically, isn't it?
Yeah, completely. Who can... the F1 car is a good comparison, actually. At the end of the season, how are you going to find the extra half a second to be better than the team further down the paddock. Well, from a bowler's point of view, what is the new plan? What is the new trick you can come up with to stop the batters dominating you in the way that we're seeing so many powerful white ball batters in this country? I suppose if you're being hypercritical of the English game, innovation and mystery is something that we're quite suspicious of, actually, isn't it? We are, bowling wise, we are an orthodox nation, when we always have been,
and that's partly bred by the conditions, because you can be.
Benny Howell,
that is exactly a name that I was that was marching towards this conversation. That, someone who's been really valued, actually, almost more so overseas in other leagues. And if you talk to people who make a living out of analysing T20 cricket, when they know about expected runs and how many overs a particular over should go for and all those sorts of things, Benny Howell's metrics are so high, completely rated all around the world. And I'll throw another name in there for you, Rayan Ahmed, as someone for the future who, when we're talking about mystery and could have all the tricks, how exciting is it for English cricket to have him coming through the ranks?
It's an interesting place that bowling fits into this England mindset, because when you speak about attacking, you think of the batting. Of course you do. And arguably, you can be attacking with the ball in Test match and to an extent 50-over cricket. T20 cricket, as a bowler, is a defensive game. You have to basically ensure you limit the opposition. And if you can keep it under 7 or 8 and over, you're doing a decent job. That doesn't quite fit into the aggressive mentality, if you like, that this positive way of thinking. You have to find people that are canny operators, the ones that are like Benny Howell, that can go in and actually just quietly go about things going at 6 or 7 and over, but mean that you have, when you get the bat in hand, you've got the opportunity to really express yourself. So that is perhaps where you've got to try and merge the two mentalities and the two worlds of baseball in which is seeping. I know it's the Test game, but it is seeping attitude-wise right across English cricket at the moment. You've got to make sure that with that, you have the opportunity with the ball just to actually be a bit boring in the white ball game.
Now, I wanted to talk about Bryden Cars, actually, because what we haven't done is we've talked about a little bit about variety in bowling, mentioned the sort of innate English suspicion of the Benny Howells type of player, but Bryden Cars for Australia, we've watched quite a lot of Big Bash. And actually, the sort of variation quick bowler is of less value, it seems to me, on those pitches. What's of more value is height and bounce. And you set fields to that. And Bryden Cars is exactly that bowler.
Different sort of bowler to Bryden Cars, but when you said Australian conditions, height and bounce, someone like Josh Hazlewood, who has been so successful in T20 cricket and white ball cricket over the past year, 18 months or whatever, someone who you'd think actually his values and qualities had completely gone out of the game, top of off, getting bounce, the odd change of pace here and there, but nothing drastic. And when you think of Bryden Cars, okay, he is a very different bowler to Josh Hazlewood, but he's not someone who's got loads and loads of variations. He is someone who's going to run in and bowl very, very quickly to try and hit the stumps or try and hit the batter. And is he going to be someone who could be a real asset for England in that T20 World Cup when we're talking about the doubts over Archer, Wood, Stone, etc.? And he is going to have the backing of not necessarily the captain, but someone who's clearly very, very influential in the white ball team, of a Ben Stokes.
I'll tell you someone else who we completely routinely forget about or ignore, and it's largely because he's injured at the moment, but he's not express pace. He has good height. He's toured Australia and actually had some quite good numbers. Ollie Robinson. Now, why do we never think of Ollie Robinson? When you think of his height and his metronomic length, again, doesn't have many varieties, but in Australia on those pitches there might be a case for it. I mean, at the moment it's all moot because no one gets to see if Ollie Robinson's fit, so we just don't know if he could do it or not.
And that is going to be a big problem. I don't see how Ollie Robinson gets into this England white ball team even in the rest of this summer, to be honest. And he's not someone who has pulled up lots of trees actually in white ball cricket in this country. Steady, but without being spectacular. You would feel that he is behind a lot of these names. But actually, looking down that one-day squad of someone who's not in the T20 squad, really interesting. Craig Overton, four previous one-day internationals. You're sort of wondering how he fits into the white ball setup, possibly because England are missing so many different names, and he does offer that little bit.
I mean, there's no Saqib Mahmood, for example.
No,
so
there's another one. Yeah, another name that we haven't spoken about. Who would you think?
Well, he would have walked straight into this team, wouldn't he? And which is a shame. What are you perusing there?
Well, Ollie Robinson's numbers and history tells us of what the cricket he's played in terms of white ball cricket is reasonably limited. He's bowled more balls in Test matches than he has in List A and T20 cricket combined.
Is that right?
So he hasn't done that much of it. Whether that's not to say that he wouldn't be successful doing it.
I just wonder, it's a very left field suggestion, but I'm thinking in terms of those surfaces. I mean, I wouldn't be doing that in England, actually. I wouldn't be doing it in India, but the pitches, and I say this because when we watch Big Bash, it's fascinating to me, the quicker bowlers that thrive out there, and they're not actually those sort of Indian-style IPL operators that we've been talking about, Shardul Thakur, and Basit Krishna and whatnot. They are tall and, from a high action.
I think just the fact that we're throwing all these names around, and Saqib is a really excellent example of someone that we hadn't spoken about in this conversation, but is an absolute shoo-in, particularly when you think about the names that England are missing, shows how complex that picture is for England to put that puzzle together, but particularly for the T20 World Cup. The 50 over World Cup is such a long way away, and you'd expect that slow bowling to play a slightly bigger part, although
and they don't play much of that format here anyway, so you haven't really got much time to prepare and look at it domestically.
No.
So,
I wrote down the 4 pace bowlers that played in the 2019 World Cup final. Yes, I know that was over 50 overs, and what we're talking about here is a T20 World Cup. Wokes, Archer, Wood, Plunkett. We haven't mentioned Chris Wokes either in this conversation.
We have.
Have we?
Yeah, we were talking about how effective he was with the new ball and in the power play.
Oh, well, there you go.
But never mind.
But obviously,
You're writing out your
obviously
team.
Liam Plunkett is someone who's not been considered. He's not played for England since that World Cup final. Wokes, Archer and Wood nowhere to be seen at the moment because of injuries. I think Chris Wokes is making his comeback for Warwickshire's second 11 this week. But it just goes to show the real problem that England find themselves with, because they had such a dependable attack during that 2019 World Cup. Even Joffrey Archer, who hadn't played for England really before that summer, they knew what they were getting. It was like signing a 30-goal a season striker, really, and sticking him up front and being surprised when he started banging them in the back of the net.
More analogies. You two are great at it today.
But
we've had a lot of time to fill.
We have.
Over the last couple.
I've listened to quite a lot of it.
How can England pull together a dependable, probably 3-man pace bowling attack, possibly 4 depending on the conditions, in the 6 T20s I think this summer, then 7 against Pakistan? So they've got 13 matches between now and the start of the World Cup to get it right, and realistically their squad will be named almost certainly by the time they go to Pakistan, or they'll know who they are not long at all.
There's a saying around T20 cricketers that batters grab your headlines, bowlers win your matches. Of course. And so often we look at Liam Livingston smashes 5 sixes and over, and you think, wow, England are shoo-ins to win the tournament. What you don't see is that bowler that concedes from their 4 overs 25 runs and wins you the game that way. And so that is perhaps where you've just got to temper the expectation around the England side.
Well, that is the concern, isn't it? I would say. Although Adil Rashid might be that kind of a bowler. You look in T20 Blast cricket and you watch what Sunil Narayan has done at Surrey. Surrey had won their first 8-9 matches with really 3 batters and a bunch of bowling all-rounders. And the reason why bowlers are so important is why Sussex, for years and years, have challenged in T20 cricket, is because they prioritised getting their attack right. And that was basically Mills, Archer, Jordan, Rashid Khan, Danny Briggs. That sort of attack. And that was the best attack in the tournament. And the thing is, an attack can repeat itself over and over again, whereas a batter will win you a game one day and then go fallow for the next 3.
It feels like we're being quite negative about England's chances in that T20 World Cup because of the bowling attack, and we're really not, because when England go into any tournament with the batting lineup that they have, they are going to be a threat and really, really dangerous. I think we'd all be pretty surprised if they don't at least make a semi-final in that T20 World Cup. And then, as we all know, anything can happen in a knockout situation. But what it does feel is a real shame that T20 World Cup in Australia didn't take place in 2020 during when the COVID pandemic struck, because it felt like at that time England probably had more things going for them when they had pretty much a fit Joffrey Archer, a fit Mark Wood, who, remember, they both went to India in the early part of 2021 and played in that really excellent T20 series. That felt like England had a more rounded T20 side in that period, and now sort of 18 months on, England are going to Australia when you're thinking, has that chance gone? It's going to be harder for them to win that competition than it would have been had it been played 2 years ago.